Before we get into the video, please consider subscribing, liking, and clicking the Discord link down below. Lots of cool stuff going on down there, as we basically talk about nerd stuff and whatever else. That said, enjoy! What's up everyone, Gojin the Makai Phantom approaching ya. So last episode on this channel, which had admittedly been a while besides the podcast, we looked at a film from my childhood that hasn't exactly aged well. But, to make up for that, we're gonna look at one that has.
And I won't be denied. All I got left is my pride, and I will rise up, breaking out, break you down, break the rules, break new ground. Had no chance, now it's gone. A new day, a new day.
The superhero genre is something that's been profitable for quite some time, given its reputation of being family-oriented fun, especially these past couple years with the MCU leading to other movies trying to get their own piece of that superhero pie. But before that was even a thing, there was what I personally consider the all-time greatest Marvel movies, and that being none other than the Spider-Man trilogy by Sam Raimi. As a kid, until this very day, the Webhead and Batman are my two favorite superheroes that came from comic books, and a massive part of why that is growing up with the reruns of the 1990s TV series and these movies. Obviously, I don't remember when this film came out, as I was a literal fucking fetus when it was new, but that didn't stop me from watching the hell out of it and having the action figures bought for me, particularly when Spider-Man 3 was on the horizon. And ever since, I'd watch every new animated series, play the video games, and when the Garfield film was announced, And when the Garfield film was announced, it sparked my curiosity in more ways than one.
Yes! Yes! Yes!
But even with all these new, well-praised interpretations of the character, including the wet dreams that are Spider-Man No Way Home and the Spider-Verse movies, what is it about the Raimi trilogy that defined this story so much? We'll get into that, but before then, take it away, Cody.
Before I get started, I think there's something I should warn you all about. Your boy's kind of a fan.
So I want you to keep that in mind. I have more than a passing knowledge of the basic elements that the Spider-Man lore and mythos were built upon. Obtaining that knowledge came from a place of passion. Even before reading the original comics written by Stan Lee and drawn by Steve Ditko, I was fascinated with the character and his overarching franchise. When I first became aware of the 90s animated series that aired on Fox Kids, I was instantly hooked. Since my initial exposure to the Spider-Man franchise, my horizons into it have broadened significantly. Yeah, I was more than a casual fan when I found out there was going to be an actual movie about Spider-Man, one playing in theaters at that. Needless to say, I was hyped for it, and apparently so were a lot of other people. Kids at my school were excited, and even several adults seemed interested in it. Obviously it makes more sense now, seeing as how Spider-Man was a comic book icon long before he practically became a household name in modern America, but you have to remember, even back then, superheroes and such were seen mostly as kid stuff, or something that only appeals to children and creepy 40-year-olds who live in their parents' basements. Sure, liking superhero media is more accepted nowadays, but never forget, it wasn't always like that. Still, the buzz around this movie was palpable, the excitement and anticipation so thick in the air you could practically cut it with a knife. The Christopher Reeve's Superman movies and Tim Burton's 1989 Batman movie had shown that good movies based on comic book heroes were possible. Then both film series fell victim to what most saw as inferior follow-ups in the latter half of their runs. Then there were several failed film adaptations of other comic book heroes, and failed movies not based on but inspired by them. Then Blade became the unsung hero, the resurrection of the struggling film genre, by bringing a slightly 90s edge, earning its R rating. The first X-Men movie capitalized on its established name thanks to the 90s animated series, and built up hype that paid off in a big box office success. But it can be argued that when the first Spider-Man movie came out, the buzz around it was just as big as X-Men. So, what was the final result? Did it live up to the hype? And if so, does it hold up today under the scrutinous and cynical eyes everyone seems to have nowadays? Well, if you were to ask me, my answer would be an absolute yes. I love and adore this movie. I love it just as much now as when I first saw it 20 years ago. I remember seeing it in theaters. I'm not old, you're old.
Being an adaptation of the Amazing Spider-Man comics, it shares many plot points to that, and obviously core elements from the originals that found their way there. This is the story all about how Peter Parker's life got flipped upside down on a school field trip after being bitten by an escaped experimental super spider, transferring the basics of its DNA into that of Peter's. The next day, he wakes up to find he's stronger, faster, able to climb walls, and swing through the city on lines of webbing he can produce himself. Over the course of the film, he learns to hone these powers and use them to defend people of New York while trying to balance the woes of real-world adult life at the same time. All while he's short on cash, short of time, and left in the dust watching a building romance between his best friend and the girl of his dreams. As if that wasn't enough, his true test as a hero lurks in the form of the Green Goblin, a foe who will push Peter to his limits and as a hero and prove whether or not he's worthy to call himself your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Admittedly, I haven't had much experience with the comics, and most of my experience and fanboyism for the webhead comes back to, well, the adaptations of the character. But in my eyes, if something's good enough where it can be enjoyed on its own merits, rather than simply being an accurate adaptation of the iconic story, then that proves it's a genuinely good piece of media, especially if it could grab the attention of non-fans to check out the source material that came before it, whether or not said adaptation is overly accurate. It follows the many cues of the story while understanding this is a feature-length film, and in areas, some stuff will have to take a different turn. One of those was cutting Ock in favor of saving his half for the sequel, so it's able to properly condense its story into 2 hours. We are introduced to every detail of Peter's life as nothing but a school nerd, and a few minutes each is dedicated to the important stuff before getting into the meat of the story like a great film adaptation should. Nothing I feel like here should have been expanded upon or given more focus than necessary in favor of putting more time into another plot point. It's perfectly paced, and that's more than can be said on pretty much half movie adaptations of a larger story. The whole thing around the spider that bit Peter, it's mysterious in the best of way. We see what it looks like, it's brought to our attention there isn't a lot known about this species, so it leaves us wondering what would happen if it was to bite someone else, while also making sense why this is the first event in history it happened. It's established, we're revealed what we need to know about it, and it justifies the further development into the puberty message. Which is kinda easy to see, but costumed as a superpower so well, you don't even fully associate it with the real thing it's representing, as the effects make sense as somebody whose body's transitioning from human to something different.
Yeah, big change.
I love how he just looks at his dick and is like, yep, I'm bringing this baby to school with me. There's also that twist on media manipulation and how regardless who you are and what you do, you're gonna be split in the public eyes, and places like the Daily Bugle will fill in that gap for that point of view since it's profitable. Now, most of this you can likely, to at points certainly trace back to the source material, but that doesn't mean we can't praise it for how it's condensed and implemented in this adaptation of it. All of this could have been here and served no purpose or simply got crammed in for the sake of creating a quick clip show in motion for fans like the Fullmetal Alchemist movie and Devilman Almond Apocalypse. Not to mention Raimi's twist on them. I don't think I need to tell y'all, before Sam Raimi was making these big superhero blockbusters, he was making some of the most iconic horror movies like Evil Dead. And it still very much shows its face here in both the psychological torment the Goblin provides in Dafoe's performance, but also on his arrival when the rushed experiment goes wrong, and with context, it's a very threatening reveal for the film's psychotic threat, and it stays faithful to the Goblin while going more into the horror potential. But this brings me to my next point. Raimi captures the darker and more dramatic aspects of the comics, while also keeping intact the somewhat cheesy fun superhero vibe that people today want to for some reason downplay in favor of standard blockbuster cheese. Despite the wrestling match being unscripted in this universe, there's a good use of method acting and writing here. It's exaggerated and over-the-top insults to the guy screaming about how he can't feel his legs. It's like something you'd get straight out of the WWE.
We're gonna break you someone to go crying. I'm gonna rip all 80 of your legs of yours off one by one.
can't feel my legs.
This is a perfect example. It's not all supposed to feel real. And anybody who thinks that's the point of every movie, you lack any understanding for critical thinking, despite seemingly being under the belief you do. The artistic value here is they didn't use their script and reshooting ability to make them interact more realistically, as it carries the same vibe as an actual live wrestling event, with IRL wrestler at the time, Randy Savage, having the time of his life, coming off almost as psychotic as the Green Goblin. Which I don't know if this was the intention, but going this crazy, less realistic route meshes well with the comic book vibe it was going for.
So much went into this movie. It had been stuck in development hell since at least 1980, if not longer. It all began with B-movie king Roger Corman trying to produce a Spider-Man movie from a script actually written by Stan Lee himself, but the project stalled due to disagreements, and for a long time seemed cursed to just keep bouncing around from studio to studio, would try and fail to produce it. Start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, rinse, lather, repeat. The movie seemed doomed to never get made. Enter Sony Columbia, along with Spider-Man comic book fan and established movie director Sam Raimi. Yes, that Sam Raimi, who directed the original Evil Dead trilogy. Long before he was a successful filmmaker, Sam Raimi was an avid fan of comic books. It led him to trying and failing several times to direct movie adaptations of characters like Batman and The Shadow, but when those attempts failed, Sam made his own superhero movie in the vein of those characters with 1990's Darkman, which had its own little success story of sorts throughout the 90s. Raimi also created the superhero show Mantis that ran from 1994 to 1995 for one season and featured a 2-hour pilot movie written by Raimi himself. However, Sam Raimi's first comic book superhero he loved reading the exploits of was Spider-Man. It was the first comic series he ever read, having been introduced to it by his older brother Sander, who tragically drowned at age 15. So needless to say, with such a long-running history with comic book superheroes, Spider-Man in particular, landing the directing job was a dream come true and an absolute passion project for Raimi. So we know at least one of the guys who's supposed to be in charge of the flick was going to put a whole lot of heart and effort into it. Good thing too, because there were a whole bunch of other directors the studios wanted ahead of Sam, including some that were just the flavor of the time. Names considered included Roland Emmerich, no, Chris Columbus, Tim Burton, David Fincher, John DeBont, Michael Bay, oh god no, and M. Night Shyamalan, biggest no, among many others. But it was Raimi's love and passion for Spider-Man that ultimately landed him in the director's chair, and thank God for it, because his respect for the character and legacy really does show throughout the movie. Just right away, even from the opening credits, I can see how much passion Raimi had for the Spider-Man character, and translates into the movie wonderfully, just wonderfully. It makes me wonder if he dipped his hands into rewriting the movie's script at all, or how involved he was in the editing process. The one thing I know for certain he was involved in was campaigning to change the number of supervillains in the movie from 2 to 1. Believe it or not, the movie was originally supposed to feature both the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus, but Sam believed that having 2 major villains in the first movie, which would also tell the tale of Spider-Man's origin, was a bad idea. He felt it would bog the movie down and cause several pacing issues. If you ask me, he was absolutely right. Besides Dr. Octopus being the same for what turned out to be an A+ sequel, the product we got is about as close to perfect of a first Spider-Man movie as you can get. Yeah, I know there were several television movies in the 70s and a Japanese theatrical movie, but as far as the rest of the world was concerned, the 2002 film was the first to feature the character and possibly their first introduction to him as a whole. Raimi's approach really was the right way to do it. If you were to ask me what essential parts of the Spider-Man lore were needed to make a cinematic retelling for the general audience's introduction to the character, this would be it for the most part. In fact, I'm almost certain if you were to ask another big Spider-Man fan what their vision of the perfect film adaptation should be, they'd be telling you it looks a lot like this movie. Whether they actually agree or not with the interpretation of the elements presented as they are in this movie may differ to varying degrees. But for my take, I think they mostly work. There's just so much detail added in that makes this feel like it's a living, breathing world that all these characters actually would live in, and feels tangible enough for the viewer to connect to, at least in my opinion, and apparently in the opinion of everyone who went to go see this movie and made it a box office success. And how can you blame them? There's so much to explore and sink your teeth into. Peter starting off as an awkward outsider nerd? It's here. Him fawning for a girl he knows is out of his league? It's here. The spider bite that turned him into Spider-Man? It's here. Uncle Ben and Aunt May being absolute pillars of virtue? It's here. Spider-Man in a wrestling match? With great power comes great responsibility? Peter's selfishness leading to personal tragedy? Norman Osborn riding Oscorp? How he turns into the Green Goblin? Even Dr. Strom? Flash Thompson being a colossal dick? Peter's early interest in photography? Mary Jane Watson? Harry Osborn? The Daily Bugle? Jameson? Robbie Robertson? Betty Brand? Dr. Connors even gets a name drop. It's here. It's all here. This is it. We're watching it. We're actually watching the Spider-Man mythos, the lore, the legacy on screen. It's all being brought to the cinematic adaptation, or at least the most essential parts of it needed, along with a few breadcrumbs left to be expanded upon later in sequels. There's also some nuggets put in there either just for Easter eggs, or basic, if not entirely necessary, world building. Hell, even Liz Allen is in this movie. No, I'm not kidding. The girl at the beginning in the glasses who won't let Peter sit next to her on the bus, according to the movie's official novelization, that's Liz Allen. Fucking A, I love this movie. The original Spider-Man comic books generally introduced maybe one or two elements per issue that would be the base that the franchise's lore was built on. However, starting with the 90s animated series, it wasn't uncommon for several elements from the mythos to be introduced at once. You could always count on elements not explored at first being explored later on. For me, the movie introduces just the right amount to the general audiences for the first go-around in what was practically destined to be a film series. A lot of people have said the film structure basically follows that of the first arc of the Ultimate Spider-Man comics more so than the first few issues of the original run. Having read both, I can say they're pretty much on the money with that. Such similar elements include the spider that bit Peter, turning him into Spider-Man, being a genetically altered super spider, as opposed to one accidentally exposed to radiation. Ben and Peter have a bit of conflict when Ben confronts him about his perceived lack of responsibility lately. This is also more accurate to the Ultimate series as opposed to the original Amazing Fantasy story, which depicted not a thing wrong between Peter and his uncle. Then there is Mary Jane being Peter's first crush right away, and the supplanting of the Green Goblin as the first supervillain Spider-Man faces as opposed to the Chameleon like in the original series. Although Green Goblin's introduction and depiction in the movie is a bit different from the Ultimate series. There are other discrepancies, like Dr. Octavius was originally part of the origin for both Spider-Man and the Goblin in the Ultimate comics, and the spider in the movie, unlike the Ultimate series, wasn't developed by Oscorp, as far as I remember. Also, no Kong in this movie. Following the basic format of the Ultimate series with sprinkles of the original comic and other discrepancies for the sake of a cinematic adaptation was a stroke of genius in my opinion. For me, all those elements work more than well enough to form a cohesive, competent whole. Mostly. Something has to be said about the pacing of this movie because it's utterly fantastic. The movie wastes no time getting right into the meat of what needs to be shown, starting with where Peter is on the social food chain among his classmates. It also shows important details like him pining for MJ, Harry being his best friend, him meeting Norman for the first time, even though he and Harry apparently have been friends for a while, and the spider bite, him finding out about his powers, testing them out, what his home life is like, him using his powers for a personal gain, and coming back to bite him in the ass, and learning the meaning of what the man himself said. Take it away, Uncle Ben!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Conversely, we find out what we need to know about Norman Osborn at the beginning. He's the head scientist of his own research and development company, he's under the gun working for military contacts and boarheads that don't seem to care for him that much. Peer pressure compels him to test dangerous drugs on himself. Said drugs turn him into the Green Goblin, messing with his psyche as well as his physical form. All of that's here and more. Both perspectives from the movie's hero and villains are balanced out pretty damn well, allowing us to properly explore their relationship with the characters and environments around them. In recent years, people seem to have come out of the woodwork to call this movie stupid, tonally confusing, corny, cheesy, dated, or say the dialogue is all badly written. They've said this and more to try and write off this movie as full-on bad. Then half of them turn around and say it's an enjoyable kind of bad. Some could see this as being kind of two-faced, but you know, to each their own. There is such a thing as so bad it's good movies after all. Do the critiques they give hold water though? Well, in all honesty, some of these takes can be simply boiled down to different strokes for different folks. I do think at least some of these critiques are fair. Like, if what this movie was trying to be isn't your cup of tea, no amount of word salads will change that. But I'm a loudmouth on the internet, so I'm gonna say something anyways. Criticizing the tonal shifts as a whole is unfair in my opinion. Different sequences will need different moods than others, thus tonal shifts are necessary. Like, seeing Spider-Man wrestle Randy Savage needs to be at least a little silly because it's a silly situation. Conversely, Spider-Man having to act fast and save MJ from some muggers needs to have a flare of danger and darkness to it so you can feel the weight of the situation. Seriously, folks, women are mugged every day. The scenario shouldn't be taken lightly. Besides that, mood shifts can make a movie feel more dynamic. If it's a dour and low-key, all-the-time type of movie, it can be depressing or even boring. Conversely, something that's goofy all the time can be draining on the patience and make you wish the movie would take a fucking break. I will admit, some silly moments in here feel especially out of place in the sequences they were put in, and some might have been meant to be dramatic, but come across as humorous. Also, for me, there are at least a few moments that were dramatic and intense when I first saw them, but with repeated watching have become more humorous to me. As for the cheesy, corny parts everyone talks about, I honestly don't mind most of them. I actually find them to be charming at times, if not outright hilarious. Like on the bridge, they present the Green Goblin as this menacing figure, but then he actually fucking roars at the children on the tram. He legit roars at them. It could be funnier even if they just made him say the word roar. And then he fucking sings Itsy Bitsy Spider.
Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the goblin and took the spider out.
Oh my god, I fucking love this movie. See, that's why I enjoy these moments. They're so laughable, and I'm enjoying the parts that legit do work about the movie so much that I can laugh with the movie's goofy moments instead of just at them. Some may not be able to do that, but hey, you do you and I do me. Unless you're a hot lady, in which case let me do you. Also, as a side note, this movie has some good intentional humor too. Seriously, this movie is fucking funny at times. One good example is Peter doing hand signals trying to web swing for the first time. Also, what happens after he actually produces a web line to do it. George of the jungle, watch out for that ooh. It's so good. Like, I'd say the humor in this movie is funnier than about 2/3 of the MCU's attempts at humor, if I'm being honest.
See, that's the type of... I'm gonna kick your ass.
I even enjoy the dialogue most call bad. They say it sounds like it comes from a bad comic book or soap opera or a Saturday morning cartoon show. Things that have been pointed out include the angel line in the hospital, some choice pieces of Green Goblin's dialogue to Spider-Man having been pointed out too. Such pieces include him saying we'll meet again, Spider-Man, and giving him a join me villain speech. He even says join me during it. The love banter between Peter and MJ has gotten some flack too. My opinion on all this scrutinized dialogue is, I don't mind it so much either. In fact, some of these lines I actually enjoy. I like comic books. I like Saturday morning cartoons. The closest thing I like to soap operas is professional wrestling. And honestly, I find a lot of it charming because it comes from a place of sincerity. After all, again, this is coming from Sam Raimi, a Spider-Man fan, giving us what he feels a Spider-Man movie should be. He's a superhero? Obviously, it should feel like a cartoon sometimes. He's from a comic book? Let's make it feel like a comic book come to life as much as possible, which it does in the best of ways in my opinion. He got a teenage crush? Break out the rom-coms. We got to figure out how teens talk to each other when they're in love. The only piece of dialogue that truly does bug me is the I hunch line from Peter when he and MJ are talking in their yards.
You're taller than you look.
I hunch.
The line really doesn't work for me. It's like, I don't like sand levels of bad. If that's how most people see all the movie's dialogue, as in prequel trilogy-like cringe, then I understand why it bothers you. It just doesn't seem so bad to me as a whole is all. Oh, and the "it's you who's out, Gobby" line is pretty lame too. Kirsten Dunst, who plays Mary Jane in this movie, even rightfully poked fun at it in the film's audio commentary.
It's you who's out, Gobby. Out of your mind.
That's such a cheese line, but really cute. You got Gobby. That's mine.
But I don't hate this one that much. I find it charming too because, again, like a lot of the dialogue from this movie, it comes from a place of such love and sincerity from Sam Raimi. Maybe it's because most of the media I've watched has been labeled as cheesy, but I don't see a whole lot of cheese in this movie. Don't find it as corny as other people do either. There are some moments where even I have to throw my hands up and admit, there's cheese and corn afoot, but those moments are fewer and farther between for me than they are for most, it seems. I don't feel that big of a tonal clash when watching this this movie, at least for the most part. I think overall, everything feels the way it should. Everything is shown when it needs to be because, good pacing and all. It gives the right perspectives when appropriate. It's funny both intentionally and not. It's dramatic when it needs to be. Cheesy here and there, but enjoyably so. And overall, the movie gives a good balance of being a cinematic Spider-Man adaptation and a movie on its own. If you just can't get into it or you find flaws with it for whatever reason, that's perfectly fine. You're entitled to your takes. This is just mine, and to me, this movie is an endearing love letter to Spider-Man, his fans, and his legacy, the most important building blocks of which are brought together with the best movie-making techniques of the time to tell the story this movie did. And again, fucking Liz Allen is in this movie! Liz Allen!
This, in my opinion, is the definitive version of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. But before I get into why, first I want to address this. While most tend to agree Maguire is up there with the best portrayals of Peter Parker as well, there is a portion that likes to hate on him in favor of giving Holland a good old sucky suck because he's super awkward, the sentences he puts together lacks confidence, and he looks like he doesn't want to be there. But that's exactly why he works so well. Peter is meant to be this nerdy teenager only few people in his school wants to hang with, and that's what makes him better than Holland.
Gonna cry?
Just look at how he stutters in front of MJ as he's making up a bullshit encounter he had with his alter ego.
I said, he asked me what I thought about you.
And what did you say?
I said, Spider-Man? I said,
He's vulnerable around her. It's visible he's making this shit up as he goes along. Like, sure, Holland still offers that nerdy, somewhat socially awkward vibe to a degree, but it doesn't really stand out. It's sorta just a basic MCU performance with some Peter awkwardness sprinkled around. You still very much get vibes that this guy is socially competent. He's far more happy-go-lucky nerdy than he is simply awkward, while Maguire, in my opinion, balanced that.
You know, you were about 6 years old when MJ's family moved in next door. And when she got out of the car and you saw her for the first time, you grabbed me and said, Aunt May? Aunt May? Is that an angel?
A lot like a similar line in The Phantom Menace, people give this shit even though it really isn't out of line with what a child with a crush would say. It's stupid and cheesy, but do you really expect fucking poetry from this guy? Especially as a little kid? Hell, it's even treated as one of those cringy childhood moments here, which is why they laugh about it.
Gee, did I say that?
You sure did.
Anyway, I love how when Peter is experiencing change in his body, you can tell he doesn't know what is going on. But whatever it is, it's making him a happier, yet still awkward enough person that begins his journey to confidence that builds throughout the trilogy. And that's why I'm of the perspective some of his lines were intentionally written to be on the cringy side. He's the only person with these words of dialogue, and it's kinda acknowledged.
I cried like a baby when you played Cinderella.
Peter, that was first grade.
This is accurate to the comics, but since it was good there, I still think it's worth noting here. Peter doesn't know how to control his powers from the beginning. He's only working off his new senses and instinct. But anything his natural senses can't tell him, it takes putting puzzle pieces together, like him messing up, and tracing all this stuff back to the bite he received the other day. Which this brings me to something you might not expect from Marvel movies today. Jokes that work for the plot and are actually funny. A problem me and others tend to have for the MCU is the jokes are mainly there to check off a list, but they don't really do anything for the story. In fact, they often interrupt it. Here we got stuff like Peter trying to use the web he's been shooting by accident, and with comedic timing to back it up. The moment was epic. He thought he had everything figured out and was excited, only to just try doing random shit full of trial and error till he eventually got it right. It's a comedic situation that could actually happen. And before someone takes this out of context, what I mean by that is often we get overly confident and then we realize, oh wait, we actually don't understand all of this. And it shows to bring the humorous potential of the scene to life. But this almost miracle-like power that would change Peter's life also shows his imperfections, as he never had this type of thing happen before, so naturally, he'd get a bit arrogant with it. While Peter might have spider abilities, he's still very much a human being. And the uncontrolled aggression shows that, as for his uncle's sake, he did something Ben wouldn't have approved of in his name. In fact, it's literally the last thing Ben preached to him about. And with so much passion and open aggression, he doesn't feel like the same awkward teenager we once knew.
Just give me a chance! What about my uncle? Did you give him a chance? Did you?
It shows even the most kind, caring people have their breaking points if you touch someone or something that means a lot to them. Of course, being casted as Peter comes as a double role. And is Maguire a good Spider-Man?
To the team?
Yeah, anyway. It's about 50 reporters behind that door. Real ones, not bloggers. When you're ready, why don't you try that on?
That's a cute outfit. Did your husband give it to you?
What else can I call it? What more need be said? The damage, the destruction. You saw it with your own eyes. When will people wake up and realize that everywhere Spider-Man goes, chaos and calamity ensue?
The answer is yes. I used to wonder how nobody would notice Peter's voice, but despite the fact that question still holds some weight, Maguire plays the two personas with two different performances. While Peter is awkward, Spider-Man's somewhat confident because in the suit, he feels alive. People mostly love and respect him, he's powerful, and he's able to be the knight in shining armor for the girl of his dreams. And when his reputation starts to get slandered, he's visibly not happy with it. And while it isn't explicitly stated in the words of dialogue, Maguire's delivery has it where you feel like the Goblin's statement is starting to take a toll on him.
You are amazing.
Some people don't think so.
How he delivers this line shows he isn't happy with how society is beginning to spin his reputation. Even his own boss he's helping to earn money. Aunt May and Uncle Ben are just the most wholesome elderly couple ever. Their dynamic holds links of realism, given how everything they do, every word of dialogue they share. You know at this point nothing bad has happened yet, just two old people trying to live their lives and get their nephew on the right path, which makes his eventual death and how it affects Peter and May all the more tragic. Now, I'll fully admit, there should have been more time with Peter and his Uncle Ben before the whole great power comes great responsibility discussion. We only had 2 scenes with this character prior, and only one brief moment with him interacting with Peter. However, from his realistically written lines to his well-meaning portrayal, you feel like he knew Peter for as long as he claims, and the moment hits you because you knew he was trying to help him. And when Peter brushes him off, there's a sense of defeat in his eyes, as he feels like he failed him as an uncle. Massive credit to actor Cliff Robertson for making me care about a character that, quite frankly, was one of the only crammed elements from the story. Leaving an impact so strong, it's easy to feel the impression he left on Peter. May isn't this overly complex character either, but as always, she's more or less a supporting role in his life. And as is, she does her job taking care of him, trying to be the mother he hasn't had, and all the time she realizes she's gotta be there for Peter, even though she herself is hurting through all of this. And Rosemary Harris just comes off as so inspiring, especially when she's trying to tell Peter how Ben would have wanted him to keep going, even after their last interaction.
You loved him. And he loved you. He never doubted the man you'd grow into. How you were meant for great things.
And in this scene, she really created that balance of strong, but still human. Like she's practicing exactly what she's preaching. Easily the second most important person to Peter's growth as a hero next to Uncle Ben himself. James Franco, in my opinion, really owned the character of Harry Osborn. Harry is supposed to be someone with nothing but his best friend Peter, who even then stole the affection of his father. And Franco here portrays a man who is broken, always speaking in a quiet voice with a face full of sadness. even when talking to Peter and smiling, you'd be hard-pressed not to notice there's still a sense of sadness present. But like everyone else dealing with mental health issues, he simply sucks it up and gets his priorities done with a smile. He isn't a happy person, as even his father doesn't have time for him, and he thinks Norman is more interested in Peter when that isn't the intent at all, coupled with the fact he shares an attraction to Mary Jane with his best friend. And on one hand, he's got to deal with the guilt of taking Peter's crush from him, but when that doesn't work out, he now has to live with his best friend taking his crush. There's no winning here, as the end result is always going to be negative in some way. He remains miserable, and even the relationship with his only friend starts to fade away. Then there's Mary Jane Watson, who is kinda a damsel in distress, but that doesn't mean she can't be good. She's just a normal, everyday person, and one Peter deeply cares about, so it makes sense she'd be a target. She didn't ask to be involved with this whole thing. She's only living her already stressful life being between the love triangle of two close friends who even she has trouble choosing between. And it basically takes Peter's alter ego doing all this lovey-dovey bullshit alongside being put on a near-death experience for her to truly come to terms with who she wants to be with. Then you got the fact she's constantly striving to accomplish her goals of becoming an actress, but due to lack of any positive feedback to her performance, she's stuck under a low fast food job she isn't proud to admit. Like most people, she's got big dreams, been hurt by harsh criticism towards her attempts approaching them, and even before she states how she's been doing well as an actress, you can tell she was just randomly approached by Peter and was trying to hide some insecurity of the path she was forced to take.
Don't tell Harry.
Don't tell Harry.
Aren't you guys living together? We're going out, didn't he tell you?
Oh yeah, right.
I think he'd hate the idea of my waiting tables. He'd think it was low or something.
I mean, if iDubbbz is willing to get cucked on OnlyFans for $1, I think Harry will be quite fine. Now, this is something I'm surprised more people haven't talked about, but I'm a firm believer that Mary Jane Watson had an idea Peter was Spider-Man. Now, before you bring up examples that go against her knowing he was the webhead, I'm not saying she knew. Just had a clue based on the little things I perceived as cues, from what Raimi wrote in the script and Kirsten Dunst's tone and delivery. Think of it this way. When she was first saved by him, she said he sounded familiar because she recognized his voice, even though he was altering it to a degree. Moving on to when he saved her from those muggers, this was just a bit after she got done talking to him, and likely put the puzzle pieces together, which is why just a bit after, she approached Peter in a similarly flirty demeanor hinting around for answers, and as a result, from her facial expressions, she knew Pete was making up that encounter on the spot, and all that together made her decide it was Peter she wanted. J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson has to be one of the best casting choices in history. His jokes are funny, and as the character always had been, he's a clear satire of the media and how it likes to twist the narrative for their own profit. And he's having the time of his life in this role.
He doesn't want to be famous, and I'll make him infamous.
He might be an asshole, but in a sense, it doesn't feel hostile. A lot of people make it out like a surprise Jameson didn't rat out Peter to the Goblin, but how JK delivers his lines in their discussion, it's not like he hates Peter. He talks to him with a usual greedy, energetic personality, but even then, he's not speaking to him with aggression. He's talking to him in a somewhat fair way of negotiation, and wants to give him a chance knowing he's just a kid trying to make a living. And speaking of excellent casting choices, William Dafoe knocked Norman way out of the park and gave the character more personality than what you'd simply read in the comics. Norman has always been a hard worker given he owns a business, and the government is pretty much giving that company hell, and Dafoe plays him with a likable demeanor that puts a smile on my face with how kindly he speaks to Peter like family. He might not be perfect and neglected his son for ages in favor of work, but you understand he doesn't mean any harm. He's just constantly stressed out and tired, and that's where this scene comes into play.
But you can't do this to me. I started this company.
You know how much I sacrificed?
And even look at Dafoe behind the scenes. He's just trying to save his family business the government been trying to take away from him. So it makes sense he'd look tired. Even when talking to Peter, it brings some sort of joy his son is hanging with another brainiac. and the softer tone he gives, you can tell it was a highlight of his day, given everyone else have been a menace to him. Harry doesn't realize this, but Norman does love him. It's just he admires Peter's intelligence, and knowing that's his son's best friend, he feels he could be a great influence on him, and commends Peter for being there for Harry when he can't due to piles of work always getting in the way.
Peter. Don't tell Harry.
Even on his last legs, he's obviously under grief and wants his son to still hold him in high regard despite what his experiments made him do. Besides the Goblin Serum, they had their own part in setting him off in the end, given the criticism he's receiving to pretty much rushing into something bad. It says a lot about Dafoe as an actor, given how he could literally hold a conversation with none other than himself. And it had me on the edge of my seat because despite being played by the same actor, they're two different people. The Goblin, while is fun, he's also kinda scary. Mainly since when he isn't speaking in a fun, hammy tone out in public, he's manipulative and kinda laid back, taking advantage of people like Jameson, who's creating this false image about him being vile. But despite manipulative intentions being there, I do think the Goblin had some empathy there for how Spider-Man was being treated by the public. Some try to write this off as another cartoonish join me speech, and while it is in a sense, it's so well written and acted, it holds more impact than that.
But the one thing they love more than a hero is to see a hero fail, fall, die trying. In spite of everything you've done for them, eventually they will hate you. Why bother?
The points he makes are true, as no matter how hard you work for others, if there's something they can get out of turning against you, they will. And I believe this understanding goes back to how Norman was kinda getting screwed over as Oscorp, regardless how much he sacrificed for the company. The dinner scene might be the definition of awkward as hell, only rivaled by that part in Anchorman 2, but this scene displays his stress better than anybody, as the heavy breathing and shocked look in his eyes tells that regardless how much he claims nothing is up, he's seen something. And that is what's shaping this more rude behavior he's quite willing to show, complemented by a score that delves into the psychological fuckery he's currently going through.
Excuse me, I've got to be going.
Why?
Something has come to my attention.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Sometimes a movie is only as good as its characters and the actors portraying them. And if you paid attention to my fan gushing from before, you'll know there are a lot of characters in this movie. I'm mostly going to pay attention to only the main cast, though, because even then, there's still a lot of them. But I will say, as a whole, considering the tonal inconsistencies and cheesy dialogue the movie apparently has a lot of, I think everyone did a fantastic job with the material they were given to perform. They made me believe they were those characters, and they handled their roles wonderfully. Maybe it's childhood nostalgia blinding me, though. Maybe the acting isn't nearly as good as I think it is, and I just can't see that. It's possible, but I can only speak from my own perspective. Feel free to disagree with me, but from where I'm sitting, everyone was good and entertaining in their roles. So first we've got to talk about who's easily the best character in the movie. Bonesaw McGraw, played by the Macho Man Randy Savage himself. Oh yeah. Seriously though, as an actual fan of pro wrestling, it was a joy to see WWE Hall of Famer Randy Savage in this role. The best part about it is that even though his character is named Bonesaw, he's really just playing himself. The way he talks and moves, everything screams Macho Man. He even gets to do his finishing elbow drop move in the movie. Interesting factoid for you. The ring name given to Savage's character is one of the film's discrepancies from the original Spider-Man comic series and even the Ultimate series. In both, the character's name was Crusher Hogan. I can't say for sure, but I suspect the name change may have been a request from Randy Savage himself, given that the character in the comics shares the last name of one of his real-life enemies in the wrestling world, Brother. So they probably went for the next most ridiculous sounding ring name. By the way, this is one of those movies that pretends that WWE style wrestling isn't staged and is actually a competitive sport. You get those from time to time. Also, gotta give a shout out to Bruce Campbell as the ring announcer who gives Spider-Man his proper name after letting Peter know what he thought of his original choice of ring name. No, this doesn't bother me that he came up with it and not Peter. It was funny, and if anyone was clever enough to come up with a good superhero name, it was the Chin himself.
Groovy.
Okay, now it's time to move on to the main cast of characters for the movie, starting with Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man, played by Tobey Maguire. Maguire was the right guy at the right time for this role. He plays the part so well, especially as Peter Parker. Don't get me wrong, I think he handles his own as Spider-Man really well too, but when playing Peter in his civilian identity, he just excels. You probably heard the comparison piece where Tobey is the best at playing Peter Parker, while Andrew Garfield is the best at playing Spider-Man, and Tom Holland is the best of both worlds. I used to agree wholeheartedly with this sentiment, but nowadays, I have my own take on it. I feel Holland is good at balancing both identities of the character, but I don't find him to be better than Tobey at being Peter, or better than Andrew at being Spider-Man. He just managed to find a good balance at playing both, given the material he had to perform. That's just my take on the subject, though. Funny enough, some edgelord kid, you know the type, wears all black, has a beanie, short-cut dyed hair, and black thick-framed glasses. They did an edgelord's impersonation of how a YouTube critic talks, trying to lecture me about why Tobey Maguire is actually giving a bad performance in this movie and why he's a bad actor. Then they tried to show me the YouTube video that they got this take from, and I told them, I synced it! Then they asked me how I could still think Tobey's performance in this movie is good. So I said, just because someone yaks their jaw on the internet doesn't make their take the be-all end-all. I'm saying the same to you all as well. Whether you agree with me or not, I encourage you to be a free thinker and have your own take that you come up with. And my take is, I think Tobey Maguire is quite charming and likable in the role. He looks like a young, innocent kid trying to make his way in the world while also dealing with the added responsibilities that come with being Spider-Man. He plays the part where he's supposed to be socially awkward or the social outcast very well, especially in the lunchroom scene where he just saves MJ and she asks about his eyes and glasses.
Hey, you have blue eyes. I didn't notice without your glasses. You just get contacts?
Look at that. She's taking notice of a physical feature about him, and he doesn't know what to say. It's because his crush noticed his looks, and he don't know what to do, so he just smiles. I relate to that so much. Seriously, how are you supposed to be able to know how to talk to a girl when you're a socially awkward son of a bitch like me? I mean like Peter. Moving on. Seriously, though, come on, socially awkward watchers, get my back. How the fuck would you react if a pretty girl you liked came up and said, yo, them some nice eyes you got? Your first instinct is probably to say, marry me. Or if you're perverted enough, please sit on my face right here, right now. You don't want to do either in that case. You can tell so much is going through Peter's head at that moment, and actually through most of the movie. In just about every scene where Tobey is playing Peter Parker, he always has a look on his face where he's clearly thinking about something or dealing with something eternally. Sometimes it's things in his personal life beyond his control, like finding out Harry and Mary Jane are dating. Sometimes it's how his life as Spider-Man affects his personal life, which is expanded upon greatly in the second movie. Sometimes it's about the Green Goblin still being on the loose and he has to be stopped. There's just so much going on with the character beyond just the words he speaks. That's called showing, not telling. Also, Maguire handles the dialogue he's given very well. He's soft-spoken when he has to be, emotes perfectly when he has to, and he just does a great job overall in my opinion. Special props given that he had to say the "it's you who's out, Gobby," and I hunch line. He did the best he could, but let's face it, Robert De Niro even couldn't make those lines sound natural. Oh, and I also don't mind the organic web shooters. It was a plot idea left over from when the movie was originally written and almost directed by James Cameron with Leonardo DiCaprio in the role. This movie is already so well paced, given everything it needs to tell for such a cohesive, competent plot, that spending any more time to see Peter actually build mechanical web shooters may have dragged the pacing just a little bit. Next, we have Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin, played by Willem Dafoe. Dafoe is fan-fucking-tastic as the Green Goblin. He's good as Norman Osborn too, but he excels at being the Goblin. He's clearly having the time of his life playing the character, whether he's playing it straight or is actually trying to be an over-the-top Saturday morning cartoon villain. Either way, I love him in this role. I never root for the Goblin, but he is entertaining to watch at least. Some people give Dafoe flack for going the typical Jekyll and Hyde route when portraying Norman and the Goblin interacting. They say it undermines the man Norman is supposed to be outside of the Goblin, that being an upstanding, no bullshit, hardened businessman and scientist. They even say those interactions can get silly, especially when Norman is crawling on his hands and knees, seemingly at the mercy of what's essentially a Halloween mask. I can understand that to an extent. On the surface, it does seem pretty goofy, and any drama is admittedly a little undercut when you have the Goblin roaring at kids and singing afterwards. But just ignore that for a bit. Let's focus on who Norman is. He's a man who's under a lot of pressure at work, including being surrounded by people who openly dislike him, or are okay with his company going under, or both. Even the heads of his own company's board don't seem to like him really. He's also a character who clearly gives in to pressure given that he performs human testing on himself for the performance enhancers, the very ones that turned him into the Green Goblin. Some may look at it as him taking the risk himself. I say he didn't have time to find somebody else, and seeing as how even his own assistant wasn't confident in the performance enhancers, he just called an audible and did it himself because he felt he had to. That's not the same as taking the risk yourself, by the way. That's just you throwing up your hands and saying, I have no other choice. Now imagine what a man like that could have done to his psyche with a drug that caused violent acting out in one of its test subjects. Is it any wonder he developed a split personality? Plus, I know on the surface those moments of him looking all scared, weak, and subservient may look silly, but honestly, I imagine that's probably the best physical manifestation of what people that suffer from bipolar and schizophrenia among similar disorders feel like when they go untreated. Overall, I'm actually really glad they made the Green Goblin the first movie villain Spider-Man goes up against. Besides me not thinking the Chameleon would be an effective first fill-in from a cinematic standpoint, and as much as I love Venom the most of any Spider-Man villain, at the end of the day, Norman Osborn is the definitive arch-enemy to Spider-Man. He is to the wall crawler what the Joker is to Batman. Now we have Kirsten Dunst as Mary Jane Watson. Dunst in this movie is more than easy on the eyes. Hey, I am a guy who likes girls. Leave me alone. Besides that, I find her to be charming in the role. As Mary Jane, she seems so kind and caring and innocent. So, I'm not sure what the word is. Nurturing? Fun-loving? Whatever it is, she's overall a good person, which is an amazing feat given she grew up with such an abusive father. Despite the pressures at home and the world seeming to be against her when she graduates, MJ still tries to live her dream of being an actor on Broadway, but she's also not afraid to work in the real world and try to make it with her will and wits rather than her body and looks. But isn't that what an actor does? Shut up, you know what I mean. MJ could try to exploit how good looking she is to make it in the world until she reaches her dream of being a stage actor, but instead, she takes a job at a diner to make a living. Granted, she does hide it from her rich boyfriend, but I do get why to a degree. You have such high expectations of yourself, and you, along with almost everybody else because of who he is in this case, can put your significant other on such a pedestal that you don't want to disappoint him. To me, being part of the working class is nothing to be disappointed about. I actually applauded her for it, along with staying the kind, wonderful person she's always been despite everything she goes through in this fucking movie. Her father is a dipshit, she breaks up with her high school boyfriend at graduation, she almost gets killed by the Goblin twice, she puts up with a boss that yells at her, she gets mugged, she gets told to piss off after taking an audition for her dream job. The girl takes a lot, but refuses to let her turn into a spiteful, bitter person. She stays herself despite her adversities, and I find that something to be applauded. Dunst is very competent in the role, despite being the youngest of the main cast. Yeah, she was actually 20 at the time. I know! Crazy, right? You'd think it was Tobey Maguire given his young looks, but he was actually 27 at the time of making this movie. 27. He was even younger than Joe Manganiello, who plays Flash Thompson. He was actually 2 years younger than Maguire, despite actually looking like a fucking adult ready to start paying taxes. And James Franco was 24 when he played Harry in this movie. I mean, to be fair, they all looked the part and played them well, but it's so weird they went with such older actors when these were supposed to be kids fresh out of high school. Dunst I understand being she's the youngest, but everyone else? This ain't an R-rated horror movie where there's a chance they'd get naked, so why have adults play kids in this case? Also, no, it doesn't bother me they bypassed Gwen Stacy as Peter's first love in favor of Mary Jane for this movie. Besides this being another cue from the Ultimate Spider-Man comic book, Gwen actually wasn't Peter's first love interest in the original comics either. He tried a relationship with Betty Brant first, then Liz Allen, and then Gwen Stacy. I find this was a needed change for a cinematic reinterpretation of the Spider-Man mythos. Do you really want Peter going through 3 other girls in one movie before getting to Mary Jane, the one he's clearly meant to be with? Fuck you one more day. Also, if it had been Gwen Stacy in this movie instead of MJ, well, let's just say the bridge battle at the end of the movie would have probably been just a little bit different. Moving on, we have James Franco as Harry Osborn. Harry's a great supporting character with his own little dramas he has to deal with. One is his strained relationship with his father, who Harry thinks expects too much of him. Harry wants to be his own man, but also seems to be desperate to get his father's approval. That's why he does things like try to show off Mary Jane and have her dress a certain way in one scene when he thinks they're going to meet. Another he does is befriend the high school brainiac in Peter, who I suspect is the main reason Harry got through high school. But then, when Peter finally meets Norman for the first time, it seems like Harry regrets it some, probably because he thinks Norman is wishing he could adopt Peter as his only own son. Sure, he jokes about it, but then the way he looks back at his dad afterward tells me that Harry really believes that. And some moments support that idea even further, like his respect for Peter wanting to find a job on his own after getting fired by Dr. Connors. Look at the cut they make to Harry afterward. See the expression on his face? Or how about when Norman shakes Harry's hand and then goes over to Peter to comfort him in a fatherly manner? See Harry walking away and noticing Mary Jane breaking up with Flash? It's still things like this that really show both Franco's underrated ability as an actor and the benefit of show don't tell in a movie. Some people have given Franco flack in his career, saying he has no talent, but if you ask me, that couldn't be further from the truth. I wonder if Harry's resentment at Peter and Norman's growing bond may have been at least a contributing factor to Harry's pursuing a relationship with Mary Jane, because he resents that his father likes Peter more than him, or so Harry assumes. So after seeing Mary Jane break up with Flash at graduation, he decides to pursue his own feelings for her since Peter never made a move on her. And to be fair, he was a bro and waited until after all of high school to be like, hey, how you doing? He was probably more classy than that, but I'm not classy, so... Besides, can you blame him? Kirsten Dunst is fucking hot in this movie. Despite any drama he has with any of the characters, though, Harry still does really care about his father, Peter, and MJ. Even after he and MJ sort of technically break up because he thinks she's in love with Peter, which it turns out later she is, they're all able to stay friends at the end of the flick. Well, it's implied, but it's made clearer at the beginning of the next movie. Harry also gets a few of the funnier moments in the movie too, like during the field trip to the genetics lab at the beginning.
Change colors to blend into their environment. It's a defense mechanism.
Peter, what makes you think I would want to know that?
Who wouldn't?
A few minutes later.
You know, spiders can change their color to blend into their environment.
Really?
Yeah, it's a defense mechanism.
He roasts Peter for his nerdy talk, but then turns around and uses it to impress Mary Jane, and he doesn't even tell her the accurate information at first. Then that look he has the gall to give Peter when he looks back at him. Cheeky bastard. Also, his reaction when Mary Jane tells Harry to help Peter against Flash and his group during their hallway fight at school is priceless.
Help him, Harry!
Which one?
I do kind of wish they could have found a way to sneak in a scene where it's just Norman and Harry at home that shows how tense the relationship is. I think it would have complemented Norman's attempt at comforting and reconciliation with Harry after the latter finds out MJ doesn't love him the way he loves her, but there was already so much going on and the pacing was already so good. James Franco is great in the role. Despite not having grown up a fan or having read the comics, I don't think anyone in the cast did actually, yet he still wanted to be part of this, still plays the character well. Originally he auditioned for the part of Spider-Man, but I feel he's much better fit for Harry Osborn. He was practically born to play this part if you ask me. All the tension, awkwardness, anger, sadness, and disappointment you see on his face at all the appropriate times is really telling of his talent. For as much as Peter looks like he's always thinking, Harry does too, and that's a testament to Franco's talent as far as I'm concerned. Next on the cast list is Rosemary Harris as May Parker. And let me just say, Rosemary is Aunt May. She's absolutely the comic book character come to life. Besides looking like Aunt May came right off the page, she acts the part wonderfully. A kind, loving, elderly woman who's just the most supportive and sweetest thing. One of the strongest moments of Harris' performance encompassing the truest nature of the character is when she's comforting Peter after graduation, when he's up in his room mourning the loss of Uncle Ben and him not being able to be there to see one of the proudest moments in Peter's life. When Peter's at his most emotionally vulnerable, as is May, she stays strong enough to reassure Peter that Ben loved him and would be proud of the man he was becoming. Oh God, I'm gonna cry just thinking about it. At one point, at a Thanksgiving dinner scene, it even feels like she adopted Harry and Mary Jane as her niece and nephew too. I love how encouraging she is to Peter to pursue his feelings for Mary Jane as well. The woman is just an absolute pillar. I don't ever want to see anything bad happen to her. That's why it messes with me so much when she finds out about what happened to Ben and when the goblin attacks her. Seriously, why do some people find that scene funny or cheesy? The woman gets attacked, held hostage, and forced to finish a prayer to God against her will by the guy attacking her despite the danger she's in. That's not funny. That's some fucked up shit. Then there's Cliff Robertson as Ben Parker. Mr. Robertson is wonderful as Uncle Ben. I feel he plays the part well and delivers every line the way he's supposed to. He's the best mixture of the original comic book Uncle Ben and the one from the Ultimate series and what they put in for him to be a cinematic interpretation of the character that fits the story they were trying to tell in the movie. Oh, And that scene where he ends up dying, fucking tragic. And finally, there's J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. If it wasn't for Randy Savage as Bonesaw, this would be hands down the best character in the movie. As much as Rosemary Harris is Aunt May, J.K. Simmons is everything a movie version of J. Jonah Jameson should be. He's old, crotchety, cynical, a hard-ass boss, hates Spider-Man on principle, and fucking hilarious. But he also shows how noble Jameson can be when he doesn't have his head up his ass, just like in the comics.
Who's the photographer who takes the pictures of Spider-Man? I don't know who he is. His stuff comes in the mail. You're lying! I swear.
Jameson does not hesitate to keep Peter's identity a secret despite his life being in danger. Yes! Fucking yes! This scene is everything. With it, you get almost every important trait and facet of Jameson in this movie required for a first introduction. Fucking thank God for this movie. And like I said, Robbie Robertson and Betty Brant are there too. They do a good job as well, or at least the actors portraying them, that is. They feel just like the characters come to life from the comics to the movie. Also, Ted Hoffman's here. He's a character that was made exclusively for this film because Ted Raimi deserves a fucking job and a fucking career, and Big Brother Sammy's gonna make sure he gets one. Yes. Overall, I call this a solid cast, giving solid performances for the characters.
Now onto the suit, Spider-Man is pretty basic, and I don't mean that in any negative way. Just very accurate to the comic books he's based on. And seeing it in live action, not for the first time, being predated by Toei series and the Columbia trilogy, but certainly the first big budget and quote-unquote modern one. The Green Goblin is my favorite version of the character, from William Dafoe's fun performance and the hammy-ass faces you can see him make through the mask, and his all-around neat design. Now, elephant in the room, I'm passionate about this subject, but there's this retarded argument going around that the Green Goblin looks goofy because it supposedly looks like it came out of Power Rangers. We're about to go into a bit of a deep dive here, but first of all, Power Rangers literally takes footage from a Japanese franchise called Super Sentai, and even that's predated from Kamen Rider and Ultraman. Not to mention, more stuff from Hollywood takes from that than you might think, such as the MCU Ant-Man is literally inspired by Ultraman, but nobody bitched there. It's the same horseshit people like Angry Joe threw around with Blue Beetle like it means anything. Like, why is that a bad thing? I get those shows are on a budget and deadlines because they're fucking TV shows, but that isn't even the case here or in Blue Beetles. Their excuse tends to be, but it looks goofy. Like, no shit, they're superheroes. Grown men in tights with outlandish powers. I fail to see how they're any goofier. In fact, a more comic-accurate Goblin design was made, but they didn't use it because William Dafoe thought it looked sillier. For a matter of fact, in a sense, it's actually more realistic. The Toku hero flavor is put to use here cleverly, as it's no secret the circumstances of those shows do have it where it's more than apparent they're using suits to the best of their abilities. Obviously though, the Green Goblin takes it further given how he's using military equipment, so it's pretty inspired by the aesthetic of those shows while doing its own thing to match the story this movie is telling. It's cool, intimidating, while still silly enough, just like the character under it. I don't know if tokusatsu hero shows were the inspiration here by design, or if all those were incidental. Not that I'd be the only Marvel project to do that, but the action scenes also carry that vibe of martial arts to do what's possible, and CGI for the more outlandish moves. The final battle at the end just feels all around refreshing. It shows you don't need a bunch of fast-paced CGI with all this flashy stuff happening 24/7. This balance of digital superpowers and physical combat I only seen in tokusatsu shows like Super Sentai, Ultraman, and Kamen Rider. It all felt so neat given we don't get fights like these anymore in Hollywood. The crew knew digital effects wasn't their strong suit, and didn't overuse them and puts a greater emphasis on stylized martial arts. But this brings me to one of the lesser aspects of the movie, the CGI effects. The CGI usage is fine, I guess. The fast movement of it did result in it aging better than how it could have, but given how this came out at a time War of the Worlds, Lord of the Rings, and Revenge of the Sith were either already out or just around the corner, I feel like they used this as a way to put less effort into polishing it. In all fairness to the artists here, there is some effort put into the digital models where at a distance, they're fine. Moments like Peter jumping, you'll notice details of traffic lights shining off the outfit and dropping as quick as he falls, which is more than can be said for what the MCU does even for today. It is polished enough for the most part, where in cases it's serviceable, like when the Goblin is flying at the festival, the light shines off the suit and it does give a vibe he's there to a degree due to the solid directing. But if you take a moment to simply pause these scenes, they're gonna look pretty cartoonish, and even with how they're shot in assistance, it wasn't anything impressive. And the parts it decides to slow down or zooms in, that's when it really stands out given the pixelization of the Goblin suit, and quite frankly, the weight isn't all there, making them feel below human size if that makes sense.
The suits look incredible and very well detailed. The Green Goblin suit has a sleek, shined armored look that is very appropriate given that it was originally an experimental military flight suit. Although I'm not sure about the mouth of the wearer being visible inside the mouth of the Goblin mask. I found it only ever worked at the end when he was taunting Spider-Man after kicking the crap out of him. Other than that, it just never looked right, at least not to me. There are even times where you can clearly see the mask wearer's mouth is not moving when he's supposed to be talking. There are some points of contention about the Green Goblin suit in this movie. Some loyal fans probably would have preferred a more comic book accurate design. Casual viewers have said he just looks like a Power Ranger with a Goblin mask on. Originally, they did makeup and animatronic tests for a more accurate looking face, at least, but I hear conflicting reports. Some say they found the face too frightening, and others say they found it too silly, including Willem Dafoe himself. They ended up compromising by having the Goblin main suit be the flight suit that was made to be worn with the glider he rides. And I guess Norman just fashioned the Goblin mask for himself off screen after he stole the glider and suit. This change doesn't bother me, only because they got so much else correct about the lore and mythos and did so much justice to them in my opinion. It's like the Kingpin told his son in the 90s Spider-Man series, sacrifices must be made. Spider-Man's suit is absolutely awesome. It looks like it came straight out of the comic books. The practical effects are pretty damn good. I don't really have any complaints about them or any insights I can say about them. I just think they all serve their purpose and look great doing it. I don't know how other people feel about the action scenes in this movie, but I fucking enjoy them a lot. Watching Spider-Man and the Green Goblin face off in action-packed combat is just a delight to watch. Some of the fight choreography feels a bit different from typical Hollywood fare at times, but in a good way. They almost feel like scenes right out of a tokusatsu superhero show. Or Power Rangers for the uninitiated Americans out there. I suspect that this may have been by design since apparently Sam Raimi is also a fan of Kamen Rider. I mean hell, Green Goblin even does the Kamen Rider kick to Spider-Man in one scene. Makes me wonder what he thinks of Spider-Man, or if he's ever even seen it. While they clearly don't go as hard in this movie with the fight choreography as those Toku Heroes shows do, they don't really need to either. Everything Spider-Man and Green Goblin do when fighting each other still looks absolutely badass. It's always interesting watching Hollywood's interpretation of fight choreography from Japanese hero shows, kind of like how they did for the two 90s Power Rangers movies and the two Guyver movies. The computer-generated effects for the movie are admittedly dated, or at least most of them, but this movie was made at a time when CGI was just starting to find its footing as the mainstay in terms of being Hollywood's go-to special effects technique, so I feel it should be given some leeway. Some shots do still hold up though, certain scenes of Spider-Man web swinging later on after he gets his main suit, and some shots of Green Goblin lying on his glider come to mind. Also, the scene of Green Goblin just coming to the World Unity Festival in the movie kind of reminded me of when the Wicked Witch of the West arrived in Emerald City in The Wizard of Oz. Don't know why. So yeah, it's true the computer-generated effects aren't always convincing or that well done, especially when Spider-Man is chasing down Uncle Ben's killer or Peter is jumping on rooftops for the first time. Also, the scene on the rooftop where Goblin jumps on his glider after talking with Spider-Man doesn't look that great either. These were the most noticeable flubs in the CG effects for me, so I felt they deserved to be talked about. But again, this movie walked so future CGI effects-filled movies could run. Besides, it's not like the MCU nowadays has the most consistent CGI effects anyways. Yeah, I said it.
Danny Elfman defined the comic book hero score, and I mean that. The opening alone, I feel, speaks for itself, as this is the very thing that coined that style of musical score you'd still find in Marvel properties today. but that's because it's that good. It's upbeat, epic, and delivers a sense of hope with neat visual imagery. The track of him climbing the walls of a building, there's this subtle sound to represent Peter's confusion, then gradually stepping up once that confusion transitions into excitement. Beat by beat till going full power, realizing in some way his life is changing for the better. Or at the end, it initially tells the story that, hey, Peter's life can't be perfect, but he's still got a long, hopeful journey ahead to protect mankind from any bad doing. It says while this chapter of the story has ended, there's still a hero out there who will continue to put his life on the line in favor of saving us, even if he has to make some major personal sacrifices. But considering the webhead story is as tragic as it is epic, it can't all be exciting, and I say that in a good way. The music on Ben's final breaths combined with Peter's tears and guilt, it's heart-wrenching.
Uncle Ben?
Here.
Over here, Uncle Ben.
It establishes the fact, despite their prior discussion, there was no ill will held between them. Ben still loved Peter, and Peter was heartbroken about how their last encounter was him pretty much pushing Ben away. You didn't need an exchange of dialogue here to read what was going on, just a talented composer and actors.
When it comes to scoring music for movies, Danny Elfman was at the top of his game with this one. The score is fucking awesome. It's heroic when it needs to be, romantic when it needs to be, frightening when needed, whimsical, mysterious, adventurous, and thrilling, you name it. The music hits all the right spots when needed. From the Columbia Pictures logo going forward, the music is fully on point. And listen to this horn and strings section when MJ is on the bridge and sees the goblin coming at her from off screen. Fucking iconic. Sounds almost like something out of a fucking kaiju movie. They knew this was good too, because they brought it back for Spider-Man 3 when Harry Osborn makes his on-screen entrance into the final battle of that movie, despite it having a different composer. Also, the choir accompanying the score playing over Spider-Man web swinging through the city to close out the film is an absolute high note to go out on. The music complements the visuals so well as Spider-Man swinging through the cityscape of New York. I don't think they could have ended the movie any better. The score is a testament to Elfman's abilities as a movie score composer and a composer of music in general. The dude deserves mad props because, as much as anything, like the music score helps tie everything in this movie together that much more. Special shout out to the song Hero, written by Chad Kroeger of Nickelback, who shares lead vocal duties on it with Josie Scott, lead singer of Saliva at the time. I don't know why either band gets the flack they do, but this song came out at the right time when both bands were getting hot as music acts, and when the movie needed that epic mainstream song to help with promotion. Give me Hero over any bullshit mainstream pop songs used in modern day times any day of the week.
At the end of the day, Spider-Man is the pinnacle of Marvel movies, and it hasn't been matched yet besides maybe Spider-Man 2, which many consider to be a superior sequel. Yeah, I know, I grew up with the film, and I'm sure nostalgia helps my entertainment factor to a degree, but I still took off my glasses and judged it if it was my first viewing of the movie. Which is why I was critical of some things I admittedly didn't want to mention. So if you want to call it bias, before making such a claim, how about you prove what I'm saying is wrong? What matters is what's being said, not who's saying it in cases like these. The film does almost everything right besides very few things I wish they would have touched up on. It takes itself serious enough, but still keeps that fun comic book cheese intact. The characters are some of the best versions of them brought to screen, and you can really see the passion Sam Raimi had for the story he was crafting. That said, I'm award Spider-Man a 9 out of 10. I want to give it a perfect score so bad. It's a fantastic movie and one of my personal favorites, but let's be honest, while there's only bits and pieces, there's room for improvement in spots, and they're visible enough to be criticized as more than a simple nitpick, even though they don't particularly take me out of the experience.
This movie was, in a lot of ways, a miracle. It came out at the right time and was made by the right man for the job, one who used a little bit of everything he knew about storytelling and fiction to make a movie that truly feels like a comic book come to life in the best of ways, and admittedly some of the less good ways. Despite any complaints I've heard over time, and even the fewer I may have, this well-placed, carefully crafted blind love letter has a lot of heart and helped pave the way to making comic book-inspired superhero movies big business for better and worse, because it was that damn good. As such, I have to be honest and give this movie a 9 out of 10. I know as a personality in the review and critique world, you're supposed to go looking for the bad, but not a lot about this movie is genuinely bad to me. I couldn't find much when rewatching it for this review. I was honestly too busy enjoying it. Movie studios have the power to make amazing things happen in the world of cinema, but as is with the main theme of Spider-Man as a character, with great power, there must come great responsibility. And with this movie at least, they came through.
Anyway, that was it for this episode. Sorry it took so long to get this one out. It was originally planned to come out Thanksgiving Day of 2022, but due to me and Cody both being loudmouthed nerds, that ended up not happening because we had too much we wanted to say. So, as a result, we decided to push it to the release of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. And due to the nightmare this was to put together, God knows that didn't fucking happen. But stick around, I got other big projects in the work that I promise won't take as long as this to get out. But anyway, this is Gojin the Makai Phantom, leaving the building.
They say that a hero can save us. Not gonna stand.